what your kids should actually learn. You know what's insane? Your kid can tell you the exact end date of World War One, but they can't type without hunting and pecking like they're defusing a bomb. They can recite the periodic table, but they've never taken apart a single device to understand how anything actually works. They know multiplication tables by heart, but they can't think three moves ahead in any real situation. And we call this education. I went to primary school in rural Queensland in the 1990s. And you know what we did for the first 7 years? We went barefoot. Why? Because our primary concern was play. The moment that bell rang, we'd sprint to the school oval, rent out sports equipment, and play as hard as we could until the next bell called us back to class. That was what childhood looked like when learning still had room for being human. Now I live in Southeast Asia with my four kids, 8, 6, 3, and 1, and all they've ever known is home education. Why? Because the educational systems here are even more test obsessed than what I experienced back in Australia. I watched what was happening to childhood, and I decided my kids deserved better. Here's the reality: most of what schools teach is complete garbage. The teachers know it too. They're essentially paid actors in an educational theater that has nothing to do with real learning. If you want to actually educate a child, you need to give them tools that will reshape how their mind works. Not information they can Google in 2 seconds, but mental frameworks that will make them think differently about everything. I'm going to give you three specific things that would do more for your child's intellectual development than 12 years of traditional schooling. And I'm not being dramatic here, this is 100% undeniable. These aren't opinions or feelings, these are facts. First, teach them to type, really type. Your kid needs to learn to type without looking at their hands, not hunt and peck typing, real typing, 60, 70 words per minute with accuracy. This isn't about preparing them for some office job. This is about removing the friction between their thoughts and their ability to express them. When you can type as fast as you think, writing becomes thinking. When you're hunting and pecking, writing becomes torture. Guess which one leads to better ideas? There are programs for this. Mavis Beacon still exists, updated for modern times. There are dozens of apps and online courses. Your kid can learn this at home at their own pace without some teacher telling them to sit up straight and stop talking. My kids are already working on chess and programming, learning to type properly, not because I'm pushing some rigid curriculum on them, but because these skills actually develop how they think, and I can see the difference it makes in how they approach problems, how they reason through challenges. Make it happen. I don't care if you have to bribe them with extra screen time or whatever carrot and stick approach works in your house. This skill will serve them for life in ways that memorizing country capitals never will. Second, teach them chess. Not because it's a game, but because it's a thinking system. Chess forces you to think several moves ahead, not just if I do this, then that happens, but if I do this and my opponent does that, and I respond with this, what are all the possible outcomes, 3, 4, 5 moves down the line? This isn't just useful for chess. This is how you think about everything: relationships, career decisions, financial planning, parenting. Life is chess with higher stakes and more variables. Your kid doesn't need a human opponent. There are computer programs that can adapt to any skill level. Start them easy. Let the software gradually increase the difficulty. The goal isn't to create a chess master, though that's fine if it happens. The goal is to rewire their brain to automatically think in terms of consequences and countermoves. Most people stumble through life making decisions based on immediate impulses. Chess players, real chess players, automatically think about second and third order effects. That's not a small advantage. That's a completely different way of being human. Third, introduce them to retroduction through the neoplatonists. Now, this is where I'm going to lose some of you, but stick with me because this is the most important part. Everyone knows about induction and deduction. Induction is when you observe specific cases and form general principles. Deduction is when you start with general principles and work towards specific conclusions. But there's a third way of thinking that's been almost completely lost in our culture: retroduction. Retroduction is the art of working backward from effects to causes, of seeing patterns that aren't immediately obvious, of finding the hidden connections that explain why things are the way they are. It's how Leonardo da Vinci designed flying machines centuries before powered flight. It's how Nikola Tesla could visualize entire electrical systems in his mind before building them. Tesla himself wrote about this, how he would engage his mind in what he called retroductive reasoning to solve problems that had no known solutions. This way of thinking is what made the ancient world so fascinating. The Neoplatonists, philosophers like Proclus, Plotinus, Porphyry, they weren't just thinking about metaphysics, they were developing a completely different methodology for understanding reality. Now, I'm not saying hand your 10-year-old a copy of Proclus's commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics and expect them to power through it, but exposure to this way of thinking, even if they don't fully understand it at first, will begin to reshape how their minds work. Start with something like Thomas Taylor's translations of Plotinus. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, they'll struggle with it at first, but struggling with profound ideas is how minds grow. Reading this slowly, and you have to read it slowly, nobody can speed through this stuff. Trains the brain to think in ways that simply don't exist in our culture anymore. This isn't about the content necessarily, it's about the methodology. It's about learning to see things that aren't directly visible, to understand through what the philosophers called via negativa, the way of negation, of understanding what something is by understanding what it isn't. Your kid who learns to think this way will see connections that other people miss. They'll solve problems that don't have obvious solutions. They'll become, in essence, a different kind of Sherlock Holmes, one who uses retroduction instead of just induction and deduction. But wait, there's more. 3 practical additions. Get your kid building 3-dimensional objects with their hands. Legos are perfect for this, but don't just let them follow the instruction manuals. Give them challenges. Build a bridge that can hold 10 pounds. Design a tower that won't fall over in a windstorm. Create a machine that moves without electricity. This develops spatial reasoning in ways that no amount of geometry class ever will. Plus, it's fun, which means they'll actually do it without you having to threaten them. Next, get some dead electronics. Old laptops, broken cameras, anything with screws and components inside. Get your kid a good screwdriver set, not some cheap plastic thing, but a real toolkit with different heads and bits. Then let them take everything apart. This is something we haven't started with my kids yet, but it's next on our list because they'll learn what a capacitor looks like, what a resistor does, how these miraculous devices that run our world actually function. Just be careful about capacitors in devices that have been plugged in recently. They can hold a charge and give you a nasty shock, but laptops and cameras that have been sitting around, perfect for exploration. This is so much more valuable than any computer class they take in school. They're not just learning about technology, they're learning that technology isn't magic. It's human made, human understandable, and therefore human improvable. Finally, once they've developed these foundational skills, introduce them to the works that actually shaped human thought, not the watered down versions they get in school, but the real thing: Plato's Parmenides, Aristotle's Metaphysics, the works of the philosophers who figured out how to think clearly about complex problems. Again, they don't need to understand everything immediately. The goal is to expose their developing minds to the highest level of human reasoning so that becomes their baseline for what thinking looks like. Here's why this matters more than anything they'll learn in school. Schools teach compliance. These skills teach competence. Schools teach memorization. These skills teach synthesis. Schools prepare kids for jobs that might not exist. These skills prepare them to create the jobs that should exist. Most importantly, schools teach kids that learning is something that happens to them, that they're passive recipients of pre approved information. These approaches teach them that learning is something they do, that they're active participants in understanding their world. A kid who can type fluently, think strategically, reason retroductively, build things with their hands, understand how technology works, and engage with the highest levels of human thought, that kid is going to be fine no matter what happens to the economy, no matter how AI develops, no matter what changes the future brings. Because they won't just adapt to the future, they'll help create it. Everything I've told you here is completely implementable. You don't need permission from a school board. You don't need a teaching certificate. You don't need expensive programs or specialized equipment. You just need to decide that your child deserves better than the intellectual fast food they're being served in most classrooms. The choice is yours. Keep sending them to memorize country capitals and practice for standardized tests, or give them tools that will serve them for the rest of their lives.